Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, we are surrounded by books, shelves and shelves of books, and glad to be talking with author, literacy advocate, Andi Diehn. Andi, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. That's an interesting phrase, literacy advocates. I don't think I've ever really
Well,
thought of
you
that
you
of
seem
myself, but
to
that's
yeah,
fun.
you seem to do something beyond writing the books. There seems to be a direction and
Mhm.
a vision that you have. So that's kind of what I was thinking there.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, absolutely. Add it to the business card, add it to the signature. Absolutely. Uh,
Exactly.
so folks out there will be able to find your work in spaces like Physical Science for Kids. You've done picture book biographies. So sharing the stories of people who are doing amazing things so that young people can connect and see those stories in picture book format. Any other projects that you'd like to mention at the upfront before we dig into some questions?
Yeah, and, so I kind of feel like my career in books and writing is has a lot of different branches to it. So I work for an educational publisher, a very small educational publisher called Nomad Press. We do several books a year, but a lot of times, I'm an editor, project manager, marketer. It's a small company, so we all kind of wear a lot of hats.
Hmm.
And sometimes we will write books in-house, and that's me. I am in-house, right? So a lot of the work I do is I write a lot of science books for kids, like you're saying, some biographies of scientists, female scientists. I've done a book about poetry, a book about Shakespeare. I kind of, go all over the place for those. So that's sort of my paid writing time. And then I do a
Hmm.
lot of unpaid writing time, as writers almost always do. And those are
Absolutely.
sort of more the books from my heart. So a couple years ago, I had a picture book published. It was more of a social, emotional learning picture book about a little girl who kind of tells herself a fairy tale about a dragon to help herself understand her mother's mental health issues. Because,
Mhm.
growing up in a home where mental health, might be wonky from one day to the next, that can have an effect on you. And this is one way this little girl kind of inhabited that space and helped herself. That was her form of self-care, was telling her a story about it. So I've done that. And then I've been working the past year or so on middle grade horror novels just because
Love it.
I'm
Love
not
it.
really sure
Yeah.
why, but you write what pops in your head. So that's kind of where my brain has been at over the last few. Well, I've been writing the picture books for a long time, but the middle grade horror has been kind of a new thing that's been fun to play with. But you look at the horrors going on in the world and you ingest them and they come out as monsters.
Right. That's
That's
right.
how we do.
There is something healthy, something cool, something interesting about horror. I've gotten more into that genre this past year than ever before for some reason. And there's also
Mhm.
something just quirky and cool about middle grades as well. I was a eighth grade
Yeah.
English teacher for 8 years, so
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, lovely, lovely connections there. What initially connected you with the written word?
Oh God. I mean, I was a reader before I was ever a writer. I was an only child. I lived with my parents and my grandparents and kind of a rambling old house out in the country, kind of your typical, gothic kind of place if it was in Massachusetts, so it wasn't really, super gothic. But I was alone a lot. I was a kid. Most of my friends were imaginary, and books were how I entered the world. Because I didn't have access to a lot of the other world. It was a kind of an isolated childhood, in a good way. It was a great childhood. But yeah, I would always have a book on me. You go in the car somewhere, you bring two books just in case you finish one, and that just was always the way it was, and that translated into I did that all through high school and then I got to college. And, if you're a big reader, what do you major in college? You major in English and then you go
Oh,
on to do an MFA. That's sort of the way to go. And I always wrote for adults. I was, doing short stories and working on novels. And then I had babies and was reading kids' books and was like, well, this is a lot more fun. These are
yes.
these are really cool, fun books. And I just have stayed there. My kids are grown. My youngest is 16. They all still live at home, but they're grown-ups. And I still just adore children's books. That's what I read. I mean, I read across all ages, but I read a lot of these books you see around me. They're kids' books. They're for middle grade, for YA. I have a lot of picture books. Um, again, they're fun and they're, it's such a rich time. Being a teacher, like those brains are working at a
Mm.
on so many different levels. I think as we get older, we kind of calcify a little bit. We sort of get set in our ways, but kids, they are popping all over the place. And it's exciting to be a part of that and to kind of explore that a little bit. Well, I still am able, while still being a grown up, and if I want to eat ice cream for dinner, I get to choose that, but I can hang out with the kids' brains as well. I get to the best of both worlds in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Ice cream for dinner anytime. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
What's a book that has changed your life?
Mm. That's a great question. I kind of think every book changes your life. Even the
Mhm.
terrible ones or even the ones you don't finish, everything kind of alter us a little bit. But that being said, I don't have a copy of it, of course, nearby. I think probably the book I come back to is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle.
Yeah. Hmm.
Just, I think I first read it when I was 10 or 11, and then kind of reread it every year almost since then. I may have missed a few years here and there, and it's funny, I don't gravitate towards science fiction or fantasy. I tend to read books that are more based in the real world. But that book, for some reason, it had its hooks in me early, and I just returned to it again and again. It has very universal themes, of love conquering all, and trying your hardest and being part of a team. That's it's definitely a we defeat evil through love kind of thing, which I think is a great reminder for all of us. But yeah, I think that book has really really stayed with me. A couple, I just so you asked me about books. There was a brief time that I was a bookseller not too long ago, so I'm going to mention a couple other ones.
Yeah.
um Brian Selznick, this is probably reversed.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is his newest book. It comes out in April, I believe. It's amazing. It's about two boys falling in love in Italy in the 80s when it was, illegal, and it was not as accepted as it is now. And it is heartbreaking. It tears your heart to pieces and it puts it back together, and it's gorgeous. And it's, talk about using illustrations and words in such a clever and unique and effective way. This book has it all. It's really fantastic. It's
He's a
amazing.
genius. Absolutely.
Oh gosh, right? I learned so much from reading his books. But yeah, that's sort of another one that's sort of been on my radar. And I just anytime someone asks me about books, I'm like, oh, I have to read this one. So there
Mhm.
you go.
Absolutely. When it comes to your work in writing, how do you hope that impacts readers?
It's funny, I don't even think like when you're doing the work, when you're writing, I don't think about people reading it. I think about me reading it. I sort of
Hmm.
think of little Andy, alone in her huge house and with a haunted attic. What would she be afraid of, and how would she want to conquer those fears, and what would sort of keep her going? And I never think about the kids who might someday read those books. Although I will say, as an editor, I think about a lot. That's sort
Yeah.
of a different avenue. So I'm always like, reading an author's work and absolutely sticking to the bones of that work and to the heart of that work and to that author's language. But also it's like, okay, well, what is, a 10-year-old in Montana, how are they going to come at this material? And how can we slightly change this material to better invite kids like that? You're always sort of wanting to make your work universal and sort of had lots of hooks to it that kids can come to it from all different directions because we all think so differently. We all learn differently. You must know that as a teacher. I'm sure every student, there's just a different way of approaching things, adults too, not just kids. So I'm always trying to expand that and sort of like make the funnel a little bit bigger so that we can get more kids reading it. So a lot of our books, we add QR codes to our books that link to videos. Some kids love videos, and
Nice.
that's how they learn. We illustrate the books. We have graphic novel illustrations in a lot of our books, photographs, fun facts, little tidbits, which that's what some kids handle. They go through one of our books, and if that's all they read, great. That's completely fine. They don't need to read the longer blocks of text, which another kid will love. So we try to sort of, make sure there's enough layers in there that everyone can find something for themselves. Yeah. So that's sort of two different answers from an editor's point of view and a writer's point of view.
I like it. I like it. What is it like to step from editor to writer, particularly for young people?
Yeah, I think it feeds itself. When I'm sort of writing, I kind of am alone in my head. I just am sort of doing my own thing, and I'm not thinking of audiences. I'm just putting the words on the screen, not so much paper, but on the screen.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, but then when I go over and read back over my work, that's when I sort of let the editor voice in a little bit more and kind of do that same thing. Like, how can we change this so that more kids will get it or more kids will want to get it? Yeah, whereas an editor, you start out that way because the raw material's already there, which is a great thing. I love working with authors because they do so much of the work, and then I just have to pop in and kind of go tweet, tweet, tweet. But yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. I do think they feed each other, and I think I'm a better editor for being a writer too, because I know how much work it is to create that raw material, to put new words on a new page. And I have an infinite amount of respect for writers who are doing that work because it's not easy. It's not an easy job.
I think a lot about, and I've written about kind of the reader and writer relationship. That's another interesting avenue to think about. How does going from a reader to a writer to an editor work? Because you're right, there's definitely
Yeah.
that cycle. It feeds itself.
Yeah, yeah. And every role brings its own set of knowledge and complications and then it expands further. And then you think about the sales team who are going to try to be selling these books, and you think about the booksellers who are going to sell them to the actual person who might actually read it. It's a long, it's a big iceberg. We tend to, in our individual roles, we see this one little tip, one little thing that we do, or part of a mechanism. And then you branch out, and like there's this huge foundation underneath that one little tip. There's a lot of people working for one book, which is kind of mind blowing and it feels good to think about, to be
Yeah.
on that team that thinks this is important. Books are important. Getting kids to read is important. That's the kind of team I want to be on. But yeah.
What's next for you? What has your creative focus? And as a side B to that, where can people go to learn more?
Yeah, well, that my website, andidean.com, I think is, I think that's the URL. Also,
Mhm.
I have my last name is very unique. So if you Google Andi Diehn there, I think there's only one of me. Um, what's next for me? I'm still plugging away at my horror novels because I love doing it. Picture books are still very much my focus. I have a book about the science of sound coming out. Oh gosh, I guess in a few months or so, which has been really interesting. Did you know coral reefs? So a healthy coral reef sounds very different from an unhealthy coral reef,
Huh.
right? But if you record the sounds of a healthy coral reef and play them back within an unhealthy coral reef, that unhealthy coral reef will actually improve.
Oh,
It will invite more biodiverse creatures into it. You can actually affect
interesting.
the health of a coral reef by just playing some sounds at it, which that blows my mind. That's why I love writing nonfiction for kids, is because you learn stuff like that and it improves my life. Yes, and I've got a few more picture books that I'm thinking of. You know, I've always got the notepad and pen around, so who knows what will next make it to a publisher, but we'll see.
Uh,
The joy is in the writing, right? That's where the joy is at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I do have one more question to tag in here, if that's okay. And that is shout outs to any illustrators, because, of course, a picture book
Mm,
has the author's vision, but that's also brought to life through the illustrations and the
yes.
contribution of that person or those people. So, any shout outs that you'd like to give?
Yeah. So that's a really fantastic question. I'm going to look for a book. Oh, okay, so this is my social emotional learning book. It's called Mama's Days, and it
Hmm.
is illustrated by Angeles Ruiz. So, you write the book and it's all words, and you only see it as a Word document or a Google document, and then away it goes to the publisher, and magic happens, and you get these proofs back, and you look at these illustrations, and you think to yourself, my gosh, like that's the book I wrote. It's a new creature. It's a completely new creature, so which just makes me so happy. And that's really part of the magic of picture books is that you have both of those strands going in. It's a collaboration. Every so like, look at this gorgeous picture of a daughter and her mother in the laundry. It's just
Hmm.
gorgeous. So she's amazing. And I would, love to work with her again one day. Maybe we'll see. Yeah, so that's one of my illustrator favorites.
Well, many thanks, Andy. Glad to talk with you anytime. And yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. Anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to mention before we close?
No, I just, thank you for this work that you're doing. This is getting the word out about books and writers and editors and illustrators. That's it's all part of the process. That's a major part of that iceberg we were talking about. So just I
Glad to be
appreciate
part.
it.
Absolutely glad to be part.
Fantastic.
And many thanks again.
Thank you, Jason.